What's up, everybody? This is Keisha from Put Your Phone Down podcast, and I have a beautiful and wonderful guest. Uh, as usual, I always tell you all that I go and I find my information through Google. Google is not as bad as some people think, and I've heard about CHS for a minute. The thing is, I kind of thought that, I was telling Aubrey earlier, I laughed about it because when I first heard about it, someone had gotten sick behind smoking weed. They went to a dispensary, and I said, okay, they must have gotten a hold of some bad stuff. But that's not the case. What's happening is if you go online, you'll see all these cases of people of all ages getting sick behind weed that you may buy from the dispensary or even off the street. When I found Every Brain Matters, Aubrey contacted me back. She said, I can find someone, but I'm the director and I can speak on the behalf. And I said, absolutely. So we have been in emails and I've been on her site getting all this information and I really wanted to bring it to you. And without further ado, I have the director of Every Brain Matters, Miss Aubree. Aubree, welcome to Put Your Phone Down podcast.
Well, thank you for having me, Keisha. It's an honor to be here.
No problem. Aubree, I know we just had a good chat about, weed and the dispensaries and how it's making people feel. And I just kind of want you to lead me in this. I wanted to put a brief disclaimer out telling people, look, I'm not telling you to stop smoking your weed. If that's what you enjoy, that's what you do. What I would love to do though is bring awareness, and this is really rising. We got it going on in our kids, we got it going on in our adults, and some of it is being overlooked. And so this is where Aubrey comes in again, not telling you to stop, but I'm going to share some stories with Aubrey later on in the interview and let you know how big this can get. It can actually be fatal if you aren't paying attention to your body. So, Aubrey, if you don't mind, just can you tell me some things about what made you create Every Brain Matter?
Well, I created Every Brain Matters, which was developed by me and other families that were harmed by industrialized marijuana. So when states started legalizing marijuana, they really didn't legalize it. They industrialized it and made it more potent, which makes it more toxic. So then we are more at risk to have adverse effects compared to the old school, like hippie weed that used to be around in the 60s and 70s, and even into the 80s and 90s. 90 in about 1995, the potency of marijuana was about 5%, but now the marijuana flower ranges from 18 to 35%. And that's just the flower. That's not including all the concentrates and other products that they have. So I'm from Pueblo, Colorado, which was the first state to legalize recreational marijuana. And unfortunately, I had two loved ones, my husband and my son, experience adverse effects. And one of those effects has been CHS, or cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. And I can explain a little bit what that is if you want me to.
Absolutely, because, although it's a big name, I like that it's shortened out. So when people get to Googling and finding out, if they want to see if they have the symptoms, of course they can go to your site. But yeah, it's a big name and it has some big impact. So absolutely.
Yeah. So I like to say CHS rather than cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. But cannabinoid are the chemicals in the cannabis or marijuana plant. So that, and the two main chemicals in the marijuana or cannabis plant are THC, delta 9 THC, or CBD, cannabidiol. Those are the main ones, but there's other chemicals in the marijuana plant too. And then hyper means excessive, Emesis means vomiting. That's the medical term for vomiting. And syndrome means that there's not an exact test for it that the medical community can do. Usually the doctors diagnose CHS or cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome by the symptoms the person's having. And some of those symptoms can be severe abdominal pain, dry heaving, or even cyclic vomiting, which you're repeated vomiting. And yeah, usually after smoking marijuana or consuming edibles or concentrates. So that's what that is.
So when this comes about, and I know we talked about this again. I don't want people to become paranoid, thinking, okay, I just smoked something, now my stomach's starting to hurt, or now my head's starting to hurt. Because we can't do that if we smoking too much. Trust me, you will get paranoid and think it's certain things. When is the time frame for a person to start taking a few of these side effects from CHS seriously?
Well, if they're not, their symptoms aren't residing within a day. If they're vomiting and they're becoming dehydrated, they're at risk for other medical things like organ failure and stuff like that. So to put it in perspective, if you drink too much alcohol, what your body does is start vomiting the alcohol out because you're at toxic levels of alcohol. And usually people who drink too much alcohol and they're at that toxic levels, once they vomit it out, they recover. It might take them a few hours or a day, but alcohol is a water soluble drug. So our bodies are easily expel the alcohol if we're at toxic levels. With marijuana, cannabis, or the cannabinoids in the cannabis plant, they're fat soluble. So it's very different from alcohol. So the fat soluble chemicals, the THC, the CBD, adhere to the fats in our bodies. And our fattiest organ is our brain. So that's why sometimes we have adverse effects like paranoia and stuff like that with the cannabis. So when we are vomiting, we're at toxic levels of cannabis and we're trying to vomit it out and maybe dry heaving, it doesn't necessarily expel from the body because it's adhering to the fat in our bodies. And there's a system in our bodies. It's called the endocannabinoid system, and it's a pretty cool system. It regulates the body with different hormones and everything like that. And our body produces endocannabinoids, meaning inside the body. But when we're doing exocannabinoids, meaning we're smoking marijuana, we're taking edibles, we're gumming up that system, and the fat soluble chemicals are adhering to the receptor sites in that endocannabinoid system. And so when we're like, okay, you're blocking that system, we're at toxic levels, our body's reaction is to vomit or expel it. We're not necessarily doing that. So people won't recover within a few hours. Sometimes it takes them days, sometimes it takes them weeks, sometimes it takes them months, especially if they're very heavy marijuana users or daily users. And so those people are more at risk. So like if they're vomiting and they're not able to keep down fluids or food and it hasn't resolved within like 24 hours, I would definitely say pick up the phone, call an urgent care, call your physician, and seek medical attention because you might need fluids at that point.
So one of the things that you talked about, and I thank you for explaining that.
Yeah.
I'm going to press rewind a little bit because you were right. People growing up, like you said, in the little hippie stage, I don't think I heard about CHS. I just saw happy people or relaxed people. And now, again, this is on the rise. What's causing this? Because it's in the base and it's in the flower. But what is this stuff in the weed and everything that's causing people to potentially die from from this? Some people enjoy it, but what's causing it?
It's because the products nowadays, like it's not the old school hippie weed, it's an industrialized product that's more concentrated and more potent. So the THC levels are just at astronomical rates. They're just so those you're consuming more THC, you're consuming more chemicals in the marijuana plant. So that's why people are getting sick sooner and they've really normalized the use of marijuana, right? They've called it medicine, they've called it less harmful than other drugs, and people believe them. And that's why it's becoming more of a popular drug to use. So now we're going to have more people adversely affected. So, the legal drugs harm the most because they have the most consumers. And their goal with passing these policies is to create more consumers. So, one is the potency level, and two is because more people are using the drug.
And it was something that, when you mentioned people are going to the dispensary and they are using it at a higher rate. Um, this is all alleged, um, but there was a story that landed in my lap about someone buying something from a dispensary and it being laced. They found it in their blood work because this person ended up having CHS. That's how I found out about it as well. Um, is this becoming, do you think, a thing
It was
where it could be a little bit more than THC that's getting us super duper addicted to weed?
Well, people are becoming more addicted to weed. I mean, this is addiction economics. So any legal drug that's sanctioned by the state or the government is to make tax money. So they want people to consume it. They want people to use it. But it being laced, that's kind of one of my biggest things that I like to talk about. Like, even though, like, I think you were sharing a story that you heard of somebody who tested positive for another drug after
Yeah.
buying the weed from a state regulated store, right? Well,
Mm-hmm.
the problem with drugs is that states aren't equipped, they don't have enough resources, and they don't have the knowledge to actually regulate cannabis or marijuana. Like, and this isn't going to be a popular thing for me to say, and I say a lot of controversial things, and um, I don't think it's possible for them to regulate this drug because we have tried to get even more regulations over the years, like warning labels, like just really, let the consumer know what the risks are. If they're having adverse symptoms, ask for help, where to get help, that kind of thing. And in states really like California in general, they decline warning labels on their products. So this is about money. It's not about public health and safety. It's not about helping people consume a safer product. Unfortunately, I talked to cannabis industry people and I asked them, if you wanted to make this safer, why are you making it more potent? Because you're making it more toxic to the consumer and you're increasing the risk of adverse effects. And when I speak to people like that are like hippies that just like want to smoke a joint on a Saturday night, they don't like what the industry has done either. And they support me and my messages because they just wanted to grow some in their house and smoke some whenever, and they just wanted to be left alone. They just wanted to get high whenever they wanted to get high and all that. But and I think you mentioned this earlier, Keisha, we're in a new era. This is a whole new brave world. This is when I do presentations, my main presentation is called The New Era of Industrialized Marijuana, because this isn't really marijuana anymore. This is a turbo supercharged drug, and it's put in fast delivery systems to give a more potent hit to the brain, to the body, to cause more intoxication. And unfortunately, that's just going to increase the adverse effects. So having this conversation like you're having today about CHS and the toxicity that marijuana can cause is so very important. And it used to be rare that people would get this. And they first established CHS in 2004 in Australia when they started seeing it more there. But before the legalization of marijuana, you would hardly ever hear about it. I can tell you, I had a girlfriend, and back in the day, she really liked this guy. And she didn't really like smoking marijuana, but she was smoking around him because he liked it, and
Hmm.
she wanted to get him to like her. And my girlfriend would take one hit off his joint, and I would be in the bathroom with her while she's throwing up. And I'm like, I always say, I don't think you should be smoking this because you're like sick every time you use it. Now, I had no clue back then what CHS was, but obviously she's one of those people that just can't even take a little bit. So it's been around for a while. We're just seeing it more because we got more users now.
Wow. And like you said, it's been around for a while because you made me think, like, I consider myself a lightweight. But the story that I shared with you also, but I won't go into too much detail, is, I said, okay, let me go to like the smoker shop. They had the little Delta 8, Delta 9. So I went ahead and the guy did tell me, he was like, okay, he explained what Delta 8 was. I thought I did my homework on it. And he was like, just take one. It was like a gummy. Just take one. And, if you're not feeling anything, take a second and a few more minutes. Me thinking, because, okay, it's Delta 8, it's not weed, it's probably not going to be that strong. I took two gummies, or probably more. And next thing I know, let me tell you, I was beyond the ceiling. I mean, I was up there. And at first it was okay, I'm giggling. And then it was a whole nother side to Delta 8, 9, and I think they had the 10. I think you mentioned the 12. But I got up the next morning and I was still high. And I was like, yo, wait a minute, wait. So I remember making a Facebook video about it because here I was at 7 in the morning giggling. I woke up laughing, like, wait, what's going on? It never wore off. This stuff, like, I was high for at least 2, 3 days off of Delta. It was so much of an aggressive high that I remember saying, okay, I'm done. I am done with this. It made me feel a certain way after a certain while. Very aggressive. Um, we has its effect on me, but I feel happy and I think happy thoughts. The delta is the opposite. That's all I can say about that. Without having somebody thinking that I'm clowning or down in weed. Just the deltas. I'm telling people now, I don't touch it anymore because I just didn't like the way I was high all day. But one of the things that you talked about, and I did want to touch on, is when we talked about if you're starting to feel some type of way after, the 24-hour mark, you might want to call the doctor or go to the ER. Now, at the beginning of this story, I mentioned how when we heard about it, we laughed. There's a shared story that, I would like to share with you about someone who contacted me when I told them that this show was going to happen. And they had a freshman, college freshman daughter. What happened was, she was a heavy smoker. She started smoking, vaping, doing all the things that young kids do. Um, Eventually, she started having these really bad anxiety attacks. That's when the parents started, kicking in, like, okay, wait, this is different. When they took her to the ER, it was something that they said made them feel very uncomfortable because, of course, they're asking questions. One of them was, "Do you smoke?" Now the daughter is in bad shape, and the parents noticed some people snickering or brushing it off, like, "Oh, okay, that's why you're feeling the way that you are." 3 times to the ER, this family took their daughter, who was happy, bubbly. She just was doing what kids do. And eventually she went into, and I'm going to get this correct, 3 cardiac arrests and a stroke. She has CHS. What the writer told me is, I just want to bring awareness, because after they did their homework, that's when they found out this is what it is. Our daughter is not making this up. She didn't get a hold of something else. She's not mixing it. It's CHS, and it had reached the point where this is our new normal. This is what the writer told me. How do you get someone to take you seriously? Because at first, when you hear weed and you've been told your whole life, oh, nobody's ever died from it, and of course you get the laugh and like, oh, you must have got a hold of some bad stuff. You'll be okay. Including the medical world, when you have nurses that might laugh or a doctor that might brush it off, what notes can they go in there to the ER and say, look, no, this is what I'm going through. This is not funny. I'm not paranoid enough, or I'm making this up. How can we get the medical field, if we go to the ER, to take this seriously?
That is the $1 million question. The drug biases and this propaganda around the effects of these products are deep, and it's hard for families to compete against these perceptions that are wrong. I would say accountability. I would maybe file a grievance against the hospital and how they were treated and how their daughter was laughed at. I mean, she could have died. I mean, have you ever heard of young people having cardiac arrest before? No,
No.
but now we do because of these products. Her having panic attacks and anxiety when the industry tells people, take these products, your anxiety will go away. And that's not true. It's increasing their anxiety. It's robbing the reward system of their brain where they can't manage their anxiety. So these products are destroying people's mental health, their physical health, their heart. She's had a stroke. I mean, this is serious stuff. So there's a couple things I've done. So I'm an advocate, but I'm also I preach recovery, which is a fancy word for healing. So I was a host mom for youth in recovery. I have kind of a long story how I got involved and all that. But one is, I would say to the parents, get to some support groups. We have Every Brain Matters has support groups for the families, and then we developed Maranon, which is like Al-Anon. Al-Anon is for people that have alcohol problems. Maranon is for family and friends that have loved ones with marijuana problems. And then you'll find your tribe. You'll find your support. You won't have to go in and explain that marijuana harmed your loved one so much. You can come in, you're accepted. It's a great space to share about how terrible this is and how it's affected your family and your loved ones. So that's one. The other one is, because I have debated the industry, just I like, if you're going to legalize it, just tell people the truth, let's create some resources for them to get help. But we can't even get the medical community or even insurance companies sometimes to pay for the help that these people need to recover from an addiction from marijuana, or the hyperemesis, the CHS, or even the cannabis-induced psychosis. So what I do is I advocate for lawsuits, and we do have a class action lawsuit coming in Colorado. And it's horrible, that has come to this point. And not that if there's people that are regular marijuana users, I know some people can smoke weed and be okay. Like, I get that part, and good for them. I mean, I'm not here. I'm like you, Keisha. I'm not here to tell people what to do, but I am here to raise awareness. And I am, as long as God puts breath in my lungs, I will advocate for our families, and I will hold this industry accountable the best way I can. So the lawyers are now getting involved because they realize these are going to be pretty easy lawsuits, because the industry has deceived the American public. And has targeted disadvantaged communities where there's a lack of education and a lack of resources. So that's two things. One is accountability, file grievances, sue when you can. I would say to the families too, write down the timeline, keep all the evidence you have of what products they were consuming, and then start contacting lawyers too.
Yeah.
Because this has got to stop. I mean, that young lady, she's altered for the rest of her life. And unfortunately, the story you just told me is not rare. I mean, I have families call me every day, and it is heartbreaking what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, this is serious only because, you know, I can only imagine how you are flooded with, messages because when I started, posting that you were going to be a guest, oh my goodness. The stories that I got, people laid up in hospital beds on respirators, and I was like, wait a minute, like this is bigger, honestly, than what I thought. And I'm not trying to push this podcast episode. This is a big deal. And if I can do anything to get ahead of it, to have somebody have a conversation with their families and say, okay, look, you know, what's going on? Because we can't necessarily stop it. We see everybody now doing it. It's like I do it every now and again, and I feel different with each and every one. It's like you said earlier, it's almost an addictive thing. Like I found myself doing it more. Like I said, tried myself as a lightweight. However, by the time I knew it, if I did go to a dispensary, I found myself looking at the higher THC, like, oh, like if 10 was my thing, then I was like, okay, no, I need it higher. I shocked myself when I started looking at the bigger number of the THC because that's not how I started off. Now, keep in mind, I started, as I told you, during the pandemic. So I was well in my 40s. Okay. Like I didn't do it as a teenager. It just wasn't anything I was into. So here I am, as the kids say, at this age, okay, smoking. But as time grew, I was like, wait, I need it stronger. And I was like, wait, no. So I had to cut it. I really did cut myself off because I do not like that addictive being kind of like feeling like I cannot operate without a little hit. And once I noticed that about me, I was like, okay, no, I really have to stop smoking. But again, I'm not telling anybody to stop. What I want people to know though is if they visit your website and see all these stories that are being shared, you have a story that I saw on your Facebook page that I would love for you to share about a young lady who I believe she was stabbing herself. She had to get tased a few times. I think what I watched, they tased her 5 times, and it still really wasn't calming her down. Luckily, she didn't go to jail because the judge showed mercy, and it was really because she was high and not off of anything but weed. So, if you remember what story I'm talking about, can you walk me through that story?
Absolutely. That's Bryn Spacer. This incident happened in Thousand Oaks, California. My nonprofit has been approved by her probation officers to help her with her sentencing to provide this public education. Now, this isn't CHS we're talking about anymore. We're talking about cannabis induced psychosis. And psychosis is when you have a break from reality where the first symptom is like paranoia. So if you're feeling paranoid, just stop using because you can go into psychosis. When you're hallucinating, mostly hearing voices or having delusions or irrational thoughts. Now, Bryn was not, she had used marijuana maybe like 10 other times in her life. She wasn't really into it. She's a doctor of audiology and she was dating a young man named Chad O'Melia, and he was a regular marijuana user. And she was over at his condo one night, and he was like, I'm going to take a couple bong hits before I go to bed. Do you want some? And she said yes. So she took one bong hit. She didn't really feel anything. And then he made the next bong hit much more potent. He stacked the chamber, meaning he put a lot of THC smoke in that chamber. So when she took that hit, when he took that pin out and that hit went into her lungs, it was very potent and very toxic. And she went into an acute psychotic episode and she killed him with a knife. She stabbed her dog. And then the voices were telling her to kill herself. Now, the police were on scene by that time, and it would have been a murder suicide, but the police were able, they had to hit her 10 times to get the knife out of her hand because she wasn't responding to any external commands. All the commands she was responding to were in her head because she was having a psychotic break from marijuana. And she was stabbing herself in the neck, and they got the knife out of her hands and got her to the hospital, and they saved her life that night. So her trial, this happened in 2018 in Thousand Oaks, California. Her trial just came to be at the end of 2023. The jury convicted her of involuntary manslaughter. The prosecuting team, the defense team all agreed. 4 experts involved. This was cannabis-induced psychosis. There were no other factors involved. The jury did find her guilty of instead of murder, 1 lesser charge of involuntary manslaughter. The judge understood the marijuana caused her to be violent, and he had mercy on her, and he sentenced her, instead of going to prison, she got 3 years of probation and 100 hours of community public education about cannabis-induced psychosis. And so we are actually meeting her next week, and we're filming a video with her about her story to help her provide this critical education that marijuana is a factor in increase in violence. And it's not reefer madness. It's 100% science. The science is so clear about this drug. Now, not everybody who experiences a psychotic break from marijuana becomes violent, but people are doing it, and it's happening more, just like CHS is happening more. So when you say this is a big issue, you are 100% right. This is a big issue. It has multiple moving parts and is a factor in the mental illness in our country, in the addiction crisis in our country, and the violence crisis in our country. Mm-hmm. And so having this conversation, Keisha, with you, it just warms my heart. Thank you, because I think more people will hear this and make more informed decisions about what they want to do, how they want to respond, and maybe have a little bit more understanding and respect for the people that are having the adverse effects, and help them and not shame them and laugh at them when they are having this.
I want to thank you. You're thanking me. I want to thank you because I went looking, and of course, a young lady that I mentioned to you, she had gotten, pretty much chopped down by the, online world when she began to share her story. This is not a popular story because a lot of people hear it and they hear you saying don't do it at all. And that's not the case. We joked earlier in saying, well, look, if you had some bad food, wouldn't you want to investigate that? When you want to look, it's like it's a lot of people that stopped eating meat because meat made them start feeling some type of way. So when you're talking about weed and dispensaries and, the different strains, and I hate to repeat myself, but back in the day, you only had weed, but now it's sativa and indica and hybrid and edibles, and it's in your food, it's in your drink. And the levels of it, people are desiring more, to the point where they have become more addictive or aggressive or, feel like, okay, what I mentioned to you, I got to take a hit to work. This is not how it used to be. So I thank you for, spreading the word, because we have a lot. It's not just a teenage thing, but I think that might be. Do you know the statistics of what age group it affects? Because I'm thinking teenagers that go off to school, but it could be, people in their 40s and, what's the statistics? I always mess that word up. what do you know who is affecting, what age group is affecting the most?
All age groups are affected, but the most is the younger brain. So because the younger developing brain is more susceptible. But the hardest group hit are the young adults, 18 to 25. And they're really having a lot. There's like one rate they were up to like 42% of that age group was using, then 35%. I mean, they are really having terrible reactions, especially on the college campuses. Also, I wanted to touch base, if you didn't mind, when you were talking about your experience with the Delta 8 THC.
Yes,
So that industry, so there's two different ways these products are available. One through states that have legalized and passed those policies, and the other way is through a federal farm bill of 2018 that legalized hemp, which legalized CBD, which drug entrepreneurs are taking the CBD and they're converting it into the different variants of THC, one being the Delta 8 THC, which is considered to be 30% less potent than the Delta 9 THC, which
yeah,
is the popular one that's in the cannabis marijuana plant. But you consumed edibles that day when you were not feeling good and you were like, I have that high for the next day.
yes,
When you consume edibles, whatever THC is in that edibles is all going to go 100% in your system. So once you swallow, there's no turning back. You're on for the ride, and your ride can be great and it can be horrifying, like Bren's was when she smoked out of that bong. When you smoke a joint or out of the bong, you really only consume about 25% of the THC in that smoke, and the rest is dissipated in the air. So you can kind of control a little bit more of your high when you're smoking the product rather than swallowing it in the GI system. So that's one of the factors why you were high for so long. And that Delta 8 is less regulated than the Delta 9s through the states. So you don't know what you're getting. I mean, you really don't know what you're getting in either route. You know, it's just not a regulated market because it's all about money driven. It's not about public health and safety. And I'm sure there are some, really good players in the industry that want that, but the majority of the industry is regulation resistance, and it's turned into politics instead of public health. So it's a big issue. Like you said, I like the way you say that. And I love the way you said, if you have bad food at a restaurant, wouldn't you inquire why it was bad, and why aren't people doing this?
yeah.
So
I mean, if I, I don't know a whole lot about it, but I do know how I feel enough for me to say, okay, I need to stop. You know, again, the whole addictive personality was kicking in, or, just the way it was making me feel in ways that I'm usually a happy go lucky type of person. When I found the opposite, the whole down and out type, it was like, oh no. And if you know your body well enough, you'll know this isn't me. I'm not the type that feels down all the time. I'm calling people, making them laugh, or that's my position. But when I didn't have it in my system, or if it was in my system, I paid attention to, okay, Keisha, this is not you. Now you feeling down and out, or you're not the life of the party, and it was because of what you took in, whether it was something that I decided to eat or I decided to smoke, but I definitely felt it with the deltas. I definitely felt it with those deltas. So I wanted to wrap this up with you pretty much telling these people where they can find you. I love that you have a safe place that you mentioned. So if you don't mind mentioning the safe places again, I have to correct myself. When I said they tased her 5 times, I didn't know that they tased her 10 times. So she absolutely has a story. Am I saying that correctly? They tased her 10?
I think they tried to tase her and it didn't affect her.
Right,
They had to hit the knife out of her hand 9 times with their batons or whatever those are called. So we have been, I watch these stories. We watch them when they come to court and everything. And we had advocates in the courtroom taking notes because we knew this story alone could really raise a lot of awareness and possibly either get more regulations where the drug is already legal or stop the legalization in states it's not legal. And we feel like Bren's story can save lives. And you can imagine the heartbreak from the Chadomelia's family who lost
Yeah.
their son. You know, my heart goes out to them, and they probably would question why I'm working with Bryn to help her raise this awareness. It's because I'm doing it to honor their son, because I have been on the other end of violence induced cannabis. I've had to lock myself in my bedroom. I've had to pry hands off my throat before. I've lived this nightmare. And this is why I do what I do. So my website is at everybrainmatters.org. If you need to find support, you go down to where it says hope, and there's a link to say family support resources. We have a weekly meeting for the families on Wednesday. I bring in a speaker the second Wednesday of every month to bring hope back to the conversation. Somebody who's recovering from their addiction to marijuana, their hyperemesis, or their psychosis, or all of the above, because you can have all of it. And then we also have another counselor coming on who's going to hold a group meeting for people ages 18 to 35 that are healing from this too. So we're very excited to provide that space for them. At the end of the day, I want Every Brain Matters to be a trusted resource. Whether we change the perception of marijuana or we provide a ton of education, we just want to be that trusted resources for families to come and be like, you're going to get the right information here. And then we're going to give you the avenues we can to help you. The other group I'd like to mention, one of their board of directors, is called Maranon. It's MAR-ANON.org. And that's a 12-step program for family and friends affected by another person's marijuana use. Because when we have a loved one addicted, vomiting all the time, or psychotic from marijuana, I mean, I always joke, I don't have to use marijuana to jump on my crazy train. You just got to hurt my kid. You got to hurt my husband. You got to hurt somebody else's kid. I'm showing up like, what the hell? I mean, excuse me. I didn't mean.
No, you can let it out. You can let it out.
I was a host mom for Youth in Recovery because we were like, we just wanted these kids to be sober. We didn't care what the heck they were saying coming out of their mouths. You know, we wanted them to survive what they were going through. So I get a little rough on the edges, but so that is a 12-step program where we come together, we work the 12 steps as much as we can so we can become healthy and show up for our loved ones the best we can, because we want to control it. We want to fix their problems, and we can't. We got to allow them to be who they are, whether they continue their use of marijuana or not. We still need to show up as healthy as we can in their lives. And I have been through that with my son. My son's last relapse, he had CHS very bad. He was skin and bones, and he looked like he was going to die any day. Mm-hmm. But he had been through a bunch of recovery programs. I had too. So even though he was really sick and active in his addiction, him and I were able to come together. We had a lot of compassion and love for each other. And we just worked together every day to help him survive that. And it was a beautiful experience. You know, it was hard. I wanted to fix it for him. That never went away. But I was able to not get in there and try to control him. I was able to let him be who he is and be like, son, I got you. I'm here for you. What you need, you know? So that's what recovery is. And that's what I mentor other families and parents and help them through this process and prepare them. You know, we can't control the outcomes. Unfortunately, some of our loved ones are going to die. That is the reality of the world we live in, especially with this more potent industrialized marijuana products. But the healthier we get, we can influence their health too. So that's the end of the day, what my goal is to do.
I really want to thank you again. You know, I already told you your family now, so we have to make so many parts of this because I really wanted to dive into the darker sides of it. You know, we painted a beautiful an ugly picture at the same time, because we do know there is help. We do know that you don't have to be ashamed if you are starting to feel this way and somebody laughs. You said it best. Hey, okay, now it's time to start filing some lawsuits, because it could be potentially fatal. And I'm coming to the emergency room saying, hey, look, now I do know, and this is the part that, we can touch on, of course, later. It has been phone calls made to the police where somebody has gotten paranoid and the police say, okay, look, you're high, calm down. That's a whole other story. But what we're talking about now is something important. This is something that cannot be ignored. It is affecting different states, counties, all over the place. Just in the research that I found, you have different parts of the world, where I think you mentioned Australia, right? Um, Somebody in Maine these things are happening. They're happening, like you said, in the college age group, where if you're hanging around somebody in the same age as you, they may not be paying attention that you're throwing up and dry heaving. They just might say, hey, that was that weed. Let's go to another dispensary. Our goal is to bring awareness. There is, I know that you had mentioned, just in passing, and we talked about this. People might not hear it in the way that we are trying to deliver it. I cannot repeat enough. We're not saying stop doing what you're doing. It is really just to bring awareness. If you are a parent, don't ignore that your child is having these symptoms. This episode is for you. If you are an auntie, if you are an uncle and you see your nephew, now it's the difference if they just getting high and they relaxing and they're sleeping. But if every time they smoking, you might have to take them to the emergency room, then this could be CHS. Do your homework, and this is all we're trying to say. I am so grateful that Aubree joined on, because this is exactly what this platform was created. And I told Aubree this. I fight for the underdog. This is why Put Your Phone Down podcast is created. The name alone is to put your phone down and create a dialogue about what you're listening to. I want this to be playing when you are driving in your car and you have your kids in the car with you, or your nieces or your cousins. This is just starting. CHS has been around for a while, as Aubree said. So now that we know, when you go to these dispensaries and you're smoking, if you at all are starting to feel a little off, pay attention to it. This can be fatal. It's not anything to laugh at. Also with the deltas, I shared a very personal story with Aubree that will not make it on the podcast, but you guys heard enough to know that I no longer mess with the deltas. It just was a little too aggressive for me. I started off laughing about it, but then the effect of it just became too aggressive for me. So I want people to know, like Aubree stated, it's a safe place. It's a safe space, and she does have so many other avenues where you can go and get your information. For the ones that are watching this, if you look down below, you will see the website, everybrainmatters.org. On there, you can see the stories, you can see the facts, you can see the side effects to know if this is CHS. It's a complete breakdown. It's very informative. If you guys want to contact me or Put Your Phone Down podcast. If you want to share your story, it's open, because this will not end. This Aubree definitely is invited back. And so, Aubree, with that being said, I honestly, cannot thank you enough. I'm looking forward to another story. Maybe we can have a parent on, that can talk about the roller coasters, because it's not just, I think you mentioned this, It just is not affecting that one person who's smoking. It's affecting this person and who's observant. This is a family thing. It's a family thing. So, ladies and gentlemen, I have Miss Aubree Adams, the director of Every Brain Matters. Visit her. I think you on all platforms. I know you mentioned X. I know you're on Facebook. Where else can we find you?
Instagram and TikTok.
So we got so there's no way that you all cannot miss her. She's on the Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and X. Every Brain Matters. This is the director with such a beautiful spirit, Miss Aubree Adams. So you all play this as much as possible. Share this with your family and friends. I guarantee you it may save someone's life. So thank you all for listening to Put Your Phone Down podcast and my special guest. And I'll be saying my returning guest very soon, Miss Aubree Adams, the director of Every Brain Matters. You guys, you have a good rest of the day. And hey, play the episode. That's all I can say. Until next time, guys, talk to you later, Keisha, from Put Your Phone Down podcast.